Oh man, this is weird. No one's going to actually say Eric.
Yeah, should we just talk? Like start the thing?
I mean, right now there's probably some people who already stopped listening because they thought there was an error in downloading the podcast. So I think we have to.
Yeah. I would just say let's get into it.
Okay.
So I'm Eric, and I'm here with Eric, and I'm also here with one of the newest WNBF pros. So first of all, on behalf of the Iron Culture audience, Trex Nation, and the Trex Army, I want to extend a sincere congratulations to you.
It means possibly more than I can put into words, man. Thank you so much. It's been a wild ride, and it's still sinking in, and I suspect it'll take me, to be honest, like months, if not years, to sink in.
Yeah. So walk us through it. I mean, this was the culmination of decades of effort, right? Decades?
Yeah. So I not quite decades, but the better part of 2 decades. So I have been lifting for 19 years. And when I first got into lifting, it was not for necessarily the purpose of competitive bodybuilding, but definitely to get as big and strong as I could. And I had a pretty strong emotional attachment to it. But real quickly, I found that the outlet became like, well, let me find some way to drive this with some kind of competitive and goal-oriented focus that was external. So that was 2004 when I started lifting.
Okay.
So 19 years of lifting, and then 2000, I would say probably the very beginning or mid-stage at 2005. Actually, no, I remember now. 2006, I had been a fan of bodybuilding, but broader. I didn't really know about natural bodybuilding for the most part. I was tangentially aware of it, but I hadn't seen it. And I was a personal trainer at the YMCA. I had just gotten out of the U.S. Air Force. So I was a young man. I was like 22, maybe 23. And I got invited to test judge at Rodney Hilaire's Iron Eagle INBF Classic in Augusta, Georgia, which is where I was stationed. My wife, Barbara, was still in the Air Force, and I was working at the Y. It was my first job out of the Air Force. And this is because I was a bodybuilding enthusiast. I talked a lot about it. You know me, Eric. Just imagine 17 less years of wisdom, fighting back narcissism, and being more extroverted. So everyone knew that I was a fan of bodybuilding, and I had opinions, even though I'd never been on stage nor coached a bodybuilder. And I could talk a good game. So I think the decision to have me as a test judge was a funny one. And this was a different era. So the only divisions were men's bodybuilding, women's bodybuilding, fitness, which was dying off, and then figure, which was a relatively new division. And it was kind of how we saw bikini when it came out in 2012, because it had only started, I want to say, within a year or two of when I did that show. And the way the INBF certifies judges is you test judge, and then you have to get within an 80% score of what the panel ends up with in aggregate. And I was 100% for the bodybuilding and the men and women's, and I was 70% for figure. So I did not become a certified judge on that day, which I find funny in retrospect.
Yeah.
But first time I'd been to an INBF show, I learned about how they like polygraph test people, urine test the winners, and definitely the physiques were smaller than what I saw in Flex magazine. But the winner, and I don't remember his name, on the men's bodybuilding side, just had these anatomy chart-like legs that were dominant. He looked like a taller, natural Tom Platz. And you just couldn't take your eyes off his legs. It didn't matter who was on stage next to him. I was like, that is sick. So at that point in 2006, I was like, I want to do that. That's something I want to do. And I started looking into competing in natural bodybuilding.
So you started lifting in 2004, and in 2006, you said, okay, bodybuilding's the thing. Yep. So in 2006, you said you were 24?
2006, I think the show would have been in April. It's typically like a spring show. So I was just turning in 2006, 23, because I was born in 83.
So you started lifting at 21.
I started lifting at 21. Yep. And I was equally interested in strength and physique. And the interesting thing is there was also a non-sanctioned push-pull meet that got held at the YMCA where I worked. And I participated in that. So I did a really shitty deadlift and bench, and it was unlimited attempts. until you decided you didn't want to go anymore.
Really?
So it was this crazy max out competition. Yeah. And there were a couple guys from the local area from the World Natural Powerlifting Federation, one of the many, many, many powerlifting federations. One of them was a tall, lanky guy who could deadlift 700 pounds, and he was like known as like the man in that area. And he was there. He deadlifted 700 pounds, and so I was super inspired. I'm like, I'm going to be a powerlifter bodybuilder, and that kind of started in like '06. So I got my first fake competitive taste of powerlifting. That was August. Shortly after, I want to say it was either March or April when I test judged at the show. So it was basically, early 2006. I was like, oh, this is the way to go.
Yeah.
This is what I want to do. I want to be the, and you know how it goes. Like when you get your newbie gains, I think if you were to plot my curve of like strength and muscle gains, I had a much sharper curve up and then a plateau than most people. Like I think my newbie gains were really good.
Yeah.
Because it gave me this false confidence. In that meet, I'd only been training 2 years, mind you. I deadlifted 495 and I benched 320.
Yeah.
And it took me like 15 years before I beat those numbers again.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it was a little heavier and it wasn't like the comp standard, and they weren't giving up-down calls, and you got a limited attempts. So obviously if I'd done it at a sanctioned meet, it would have been lower. But like compared to my lifetime best numbers of like 350 something on bench and 570 on deadlifts, 19, like that was 2021 when I did that, you'd be like, I feel like you came out of the gates and then really slowed down, and you wouldn't be wrong. But I don't know I think that's just my body. So,
I was kind of in a similar boat where I felt like my newbie gains were pretty disproportionate. Not my like true newbie gains when I first started lifting. I was 12 years old when I first started lifting, right?
That's tough because you're puberty at the same time.
Yeah. So, but like when I decided like, oh, now I'm like, 18 and I'm going to like really just live in the gym and eat like crazy. Like when you first kind of get your stuff together and say, I'm going to get huge, right? The gains I experienced in that year were crazy. And I remember, honest to God, it's so funny to think back about this, but I remember, honest to God, feeling like I was at a crossroads in my life where I was like, I owe it to myself right now to decide if I have Olympia level genetics. Like, should I start taking the highest doses of every drug on the planet and just make this my entire life and personality?
To clarify, this is at the age of 12 you're having these thoughts?
No, this is when I was 19. After I I think around the age of 18, I said, I'm going to get huge. And like, I very quickly put on 50 pretty okay pounds. Like I got really big really quick. And when you're that age, you can only view life in terms of linear relationships, right?
Yeah.
So I was like, okay, I gained 50 this year, 50 next year. After that, like I'm ready to go, and I was like, man, I think I really ought to give serious consideration to being like an IFBB pro and just like going all in on this stuff. And thank God I did it, because I don't think I have what it takes in terms of genetics. But at the time, I was part confident, part delusional, and honestly, at that time, I was thinking like, should I go the natural bodybuilding route or the other route? And to each their own. I mean, I at that time, I didn't even really pay any attention to natural bodybuilding. I was following just the IFBB stuff because I thought it was awesome, and it is awesome. But I started looking into it in a real practical way. And at that time, you could still get all the oral prohormone kind of stuff that you wanted at any old supplement store. And I started looking into it. I was like, this stuff looks terrible for your liver. And like, I'd like to stick around a while. So I'm like, I don't want to do that. And then I'm looking at like, okay, what are the other options? And at that time, it was like, well, now you're just like committing a bunch of crimes all the time. And like, you have to kind of be okay with that. And like, the dude who ran the supplement store, when I was in high school, there was this guy in town.
So let me ask you a question. At 18, what year was it?
2009.
Yeah, so this is actually a very similar era, and I had a very similar experience, because when I became aware of bodybuilding, I was not even aware of the natural scene, and I was like, well, let me think about what I need to do and if this is for me and if I'm willing to do this. And I watched like the HBO Real Sport documentary, and I was convincing myself that maybe roids are something I could do. And yeah, you could buy prohormones over the counter at GNC. You can get them at bodybuilding.com. And, the reason I didn't actually compete in the INBF specifically until '09, I did some other federations, was that I had some very brief stints with over-the-counter prohormones in 2005 and early 2006 before I was fully aware of the natural bodybuilding scene. And these were so like kind of coming out at the time. They weren't even banned by the NGA or the INBA. So in '06, when I considered I want to start competing, I emailed a bunch of the promoters. I talked to a few on the phone and even the heads of some organizations. I was like, look, I want to do this right. I don't want to break any rules. And the INBF promoter, it was Kevin James, who runs the Washington State and did all the way until last year. In 2000, but an email in 2006 said, hey, man, look, a ton of people have taken these. This is not the first email I've had. And you're probably not going to want to hear this, but you're not eligible for the WNBF until 2 years after the 2-year amnesty period for the prohormones. And by the way, for everything else in the banned substance list, and once you join, it's 7 years drug-free. And now these days it's 10-year. But this is hilarious. You'd love this. Like some of the old school heads who are running these organizations, the NGA, Andy Bustinto just called me in response to my email and it's like, hey, this is Andy. And it's like this dude from Jersey. And he's like, Eric, I don't know what this email is. Are you taking steroids? And I'm like, well, I don't think so, sort of. And here's what it is. I got it over the counter. I can't find it on your banned substance list, but I just want to make sure that I'm eligible. I don't want to compete where I'm not allowed. I want to play by the rules. And he was like, well, if it's not steroids, you're good to go. And I was like, okay. And it was relatively ambiguous. So, and then unfortunately, I have put this out there before, so I will say it again. And I don't mean this to disparage the organization. It could have just been to respond to the email. The INBA responded with, just make sure you cut it out 6 weeks prior to the show. It's not on a banned substance list, but you will fail a urinalysis test. And in the email, I'd been like, hey, this is a year ago. Like I have not taken this,
Yeah.
So that was discouraging. But anyway, so I ended up doing an NPC show and an INBA show in my very first '07 season. And then I waited till 2009 to compete again. And from that point onward, I was eligible for all the organizations. But anyway, I actually was, I'll get some creatine, get some Andro 1,4, and I'll try Superdrol. And so I had a few stints.
Yeah. And like some of those were duds and some of them were just like literal oral anabolics that were being paraded as prohormones. And there was a lot of diversity.
They were consistent. Because I tell you what, dude, I had my friend who ran Superdrol and he gained like 21 pounds. And the time I ran it, I can't remember it that well. It was 2005, I want to say. I ate everything in sight and I gained 7 pounds, and it looked like I gained 7 pounds for eating everything in sight.
Yeah.
Like, I'm not saying like I didn't have a real cycle or something. It could have been, I don't know what it was, but I did not have the prototypical Superdrol experience that you saw online.
Yeah. No, and that's what I mean. Like there was a lot of variability from product to product in terms of like some of these are just useless and some seem to be really potent. And then even within product, it seemed like sometimes people would do it and just be like, I think I got the placebo pills this time around. Like I didn't get much out of this at all. And then, I remember like, man, the thing that was so dangerous about those things, like I'm not someone who's always like clamoring for more tighter regulations on everything, but there were like dudes at my gym who would ask me questions of all people just because it was like a family gym and there's only a few like real meatheads there. And they're asking me about this stuff. And I was like, I've never taken them, but like, I'll listen to your questions and see if I know anything. And they're like, yeah, it's like every time I go out and I'm like really partying super hard, like my arm gets kind of numb and I'm like, you're dying. You need to not do the things you're doing right now. I'm not a medical doctor, but that sounds bad. So you stop pickling your liver with everything you can get your hands on. That would be my first recommendation. But yeah, they were just like sitting on the counter and anyone could go grab them. And there was really no one telling you like, hey, by the way, like you should probably like think very carefully about how you go on these, how you go off these, what kind of support you're doing. That maybe not binge drinking when you're pummeling your liver with all of
oral anabolics. Yeah. I feel like that's kind of where we're at now with SARMs. I don't know if I see parallels, and I don't know about you.
Honestly, I just don't have my ear to the ground enough. I don't know what's going on out there with SARMs. I truly have no idea.
It's similar. I mean, I haven't been paying attention to whether or not they're being taken off shelves or banned or what have you, but the number of, like, because I know a lot of promoters, and the number of times that they've had people like go, "Oh, I read your banned substance list. Apparently, this is banned." I'm like, yeah, So I kind of empathize, and anyway, it's just interesting to see we were actually in the very same headset at the start, not fully aware of natural bodybuilding, and kind of preparing ourselves for this pathway. And
yeah,
I know we're both relatively conservative people in terms of our personalities, but eventually, when I went to that natural bodybuilding show, I was like, oh, thank God! Like, I don't really want a drug dealer, and I don't
yeah,
like. And I also realized, like, I knew my personality was that I wasn't gonna. If I thought I was training as hard as I could and doing my nutrition the way I could, and I wasn't making more gains, and drugs are on the table, I would just take more. Like, that was my competitive nature, especially when I started competing. And I was like, oh, good. I've got a way to safeguard against that. And I was just like, I remember just closing the door on the possibility for me. And I was like, okay, fantastic. I can go that route. That's probably a very good thing in retrospect.
yeah. For me, the main barriers were like, I didn't want to. I just looked at the liver related implications. I was like, don't want to really do a bunch of prohormones for an extended period of time. So that's out. And then, like I was getting to this story where there's a supplement shop in town, and they had this deal where they were like, we will match literally any supplement price. Like, you can go find, and this is back when you had to like print it out. This is like pre-smartphones, right? And they're like, dude, you can go print out any pricing that you find anywhere on the internet, no matter how sketchy the website, and we will match that price if we carry the product. And like, I was going in there, and like, I was young and broke, and I'm like, getting these insane deals on supplements. And I'm like, I don't know how they do it. And then years later, they get busted because they've been selling steroids in the back room of the shop. They got busted in this huge steroid distribution ring. And I mean, years and years and years in jail and all this other stuff. I mean, it was a huge operation. And so simultaneously, I realized, first of all, that's why the supplements were so cheap. Is they really just wanted to be able to say, hey, we order them, they go out the door. This is a business, right? But then the second realization was, I don't think I'm really about that life, And I think it's probably a little different now with, I mean, I guess we're old enough now that we can look back and say times have really changed since whenever. But like, I would imagine it's different now with how society has kind of embraced hormone replacement therapy and TRT, and there's all these different like quasi medical centers popping up in strip malls, especially in certain areas of the country. I would imagine it's not quite as crazy, but I frankly don't know a damn thing about it. But anyway, yeah, I was there and I was like, okay, if I'm going to do this and if I'm really going to go into it, now's the time to kind of, choose left or right when you're at that fork in the road. And, I would see the people in my gym who clearly were blowing up over the course of like 4 months. And I'm like, I know what's going on over there. But, and back then, like, they were super open about it. But ultimately, I chose the path you chose, which was, I guess I'll stay natural and see how this goes, because I don't want to mess up my liver. Don't want to take the legal risk of acquiring all this stuff. And frankly, to be honest, I knew enough about science. I was taking kind of like my initial physiology courses, and I was like, I'll be honest, that seems kind of complicated, trying to balance all these different, drugs basically, and how am I going to cycle on this and cycle off of this, and what's the ramifications? I'm one of those people who's so detail oriented. I want the correct way to do it, especially back then when I believed more in the concept of correct ways to do things.
Yeah, the optimal is always an optimal.
Yeah, so I wanted, like, what's the optimal way to do this? And I realized that in that world at the time, the way you would do that is you would get like 3 opinions from random people on a bodybuilding forum and say like, well, Big Arms 39 said that I should take this much. And it's like, well, that's just pure medical advice. So like, I don't really feel comfortable taking that from Big Arms 39. And why does he have a different completely different opinion than the only other reputable person that everyone seems to listen to on that bodybuilding forum? And I was like, yeah, this is not my thing. And so, yeah, natural bodybuilding seemed a lot simpler.
Yeah, I would say you were a little more mature than me because you made slightly more conservative decisions at 18 than I did at 21, 22. But yeah, I was an impatient, dumb person. As I was maybe your typical 22-year-old male. But no, I totally relate to that. It's funny that we totally relate on that, but and maybe we'll get into it. Maybe I'm, shifting things out of order, and you can certainly direct it a different way. But your motivation for competing and getting into bodybuilding has always sounded like it shares some things with mine, but the core reasons are different.
Yeah.
At 18, you weren't yet into your graduate work. You were just getting into your first year of college, and you were thinking about competing in bodybuilding. Were you thinking about competing in bodybuilding for the physiological interest at that point, or did that happen as you got deeper into university?
So the way it really went, when I was like 16, 17, 18, I was obsessed with wrestling. Like I trained in a way that was just completely not advisable, to the point that I'm still paying for it. Like when I was preparing for my final year of wrestling, I would, lift weights twice a day, do a wrestling workout each day, do a cardio session most days. Like I was doing like 12 training sessions a week and just hours on end doing everything you could possibly do. Looking back, it was just way too much. I wasn't recovering worth a damn because these were long training sessions. But so I had all this interest in these physical pursuits, and I was really competitive, but I just kept getting concussions. And I really, I'm amazed that they let me finish my senior year of wrestling because I had accumulated 3 concussions within a calendar year. And I thought with the third one that surely they wouldn't let me back. But I found one doctor incompetent enough to override my primary doctor and say, oh, yeah, go ahead. You can do it. Go for it.
Dude, my high school wasn't even screening back in,
Yeah.
I graduated in 01.
Yeah, I was the first person in our high school who had done the retest portion of the kind of cognitive testing. Like they had just started rolling that out as kind of like a pilot study kind of thing. Not a study because I didn't sign a consent form or anything, but it was like they were just starting to embrace maybe we should check to see if people are actually cognitively being affected by this stuff. So I was one of the first people. We all did baseline, and I was one of the first people to get a concussion after that and do the post testing. And I failed miserably the first time because I was still acutely pretty concussed. It was it happened on a Saturday, and they're like, "We'll bring you in Monday, see how you're doing." And I was just drifting, not even focused on the computer screen, just totally out of it. But anyway, yeah. So I got a bunch of concussions and went to college and was not a competitive athlete anymore. And it was just weird. When you've been training hard since you were 12, it basically means since you became the person you identify with.
Self-aware.
Yeah. No one thinks about their core self as who they were when they were 6, right? So it's as you were determining who am I as a person, you've been doing this all throughout, without fail, consistently, and with a high level of enthusiasm and with a competitive spirit behind it. So what are you going to do now? And so at first I was just lost, and I was lifting for pure, it was a mixture of vanity and just sunk cost. Well, I've been doing this since I was 12 and spent way too much time and effort on it. So keep training? I don't know.
Yeah.
For what? Who knows? So I was well, I guess I'll just try to get really jacked or something. And I did have a lot of that immature kind of vanity at the time. And it was also just kind of a habit. But I was kind of lost from 18, 19 years old. And then when I was 20, there was just convergence of things where I, had dabbled, did a little powerlifting, hadn't done bodybuilding yet. And I was you know what, as I was getting into more physiology courses, I had entered freshman year, and there was a bunch of people who said, oh, yeah, I want to do exercise science because they're meatheads like I was at the time. And as the science stuff started actually happening, they're oh, shit, there's long words, and I'm in biochemistry class. I don't want anything to do with this, right? And so people started saying, I'm going to do a different thing. This is more science than exercise. I had a very different understanding of what this would be like. But as the science started really ramping up in that curriculum, I was oh, wow, this is way cooler than I thought. And I just started really getting completely just deeper and deeper, and just really fell in love with the science side of it. And the physiology was just fascinating to me. And specifically, I think, especially now that I'm on like the educator side, I think it's like so much easier to get people interested in physiology when you begin by thinking about the extremes, right? It's so cool to think about the extremes of physiology. And that really drew me in, and I could start to say, okay, I'm thinking of these extreme physiological contexts. I'm viewing that through the prism, or from the reference point of the things I've done with training and dieting for wrestling and powerlifting and things like that. And I was like, I kind of got to the point where I felt like bodybuilding was like the best way to express these and kind of experience some of these physiological extremes that were really fascinating to me. And so the reality is, I did not get into bodybuilding because I looked at bodybuilding and said, I want to be up there on stage posing, and I want the spotlight on me, and I want to, put together that perfect posing routine for the artistry and the performance element. And I want to have my body be almost like a work of art in terms of how I craft it and how I pose it and things like that. I was always pretty introverted, pretty shy, grew up with Tourette syndrome, like a pretty bad case of Tourette syndrome. So as a kid, when all the eyes were on me, that was usually a bad thing. Like I kind of associated, I think subconsciously, if I'm the center of the show, then I'm probably doing something embarrassing that's not under my volitional control, and that's not great. So for whatever reason, like I just was not interested in the kind of bodybuilding culture and the bodybuilding history and the art of it. And I if anything, I kind of begrudgingly tolerated that stuff. But for me, I was like, I want to do the most extreme thing I can physiologically, short of, like I said, taking on all the legal risk of doing a bunch of steroids. And so natural bodybuilding was just kind of the outlet for that. And like Helms, we've talked about this many times. My idea of the perfect bodybuilding show would probably be enough to push you out of the sport entirely, because my idea of the perfect bodybuilding show takes about 20 minutes. You show up, you don't even put a tan on. Why bother? And just let the judges walk up and down the line. You just go through your mandatories, and if they want to see one again, say, hey, give me that one again. Okay, cool. And that's it. You do it in a gym auditorium, no need for all the lights and all that stuff. And you're in and out in 20 minutes, and say, you had the freakiest physique. I can't believe you put yourself through that. Good job. And so like I kind of dread, like, I have to do a posing routine. This is going to be so embarrassing and stuff like that. But yeah, I know that you feel totally different. So I'm interested to hear your kind of what drew you to bodybuilding, I guess.
I wouldn't say it's totally different, but I would say that we have different order of operations. I might be PEMDAS and you might be whatever that spells backwards. Brain's not working that quick. I'm prepping. But no, I absolutely relate to that, but it was more of a later stage occurrence. So what actually drew me into competitive bodybuilding, because I had stages. I didn't start with artistry, history, and all that. But it was in there, the seeds were planted, and I didn't start with the science. And actually that was something that to me was almost the same way I look at, oh, let me try this different exercise. Like I need an edge, everything. People see me as the science guy. They see me as a coach. They see me an educator, as a communicator, whatever, podcaster. But ultimately, in the end, it's all just this self-driven, very motivated bodybuilder who looked for outlets, and then it grew from that. So, but the initial core was a deep emotional connection to bodybuilding as an outlet for me. And this is actually crystallized over two experiences. One, me getting into lifting. Two, I think three experiences. Two, almost everyone, the first time they go through contest prep, if they come out on the other side of it, and they successfully got on stage, which I think is a huge feat, and they push themselves to new levels, they realize they're more capable of what they thought they were previously. And then the 2009 season, where I really pushed myself and probably had what will hopefully always be the hardest year of my life. I don't choose to have higher trauma than that in anywhere in my life, but life throws curveballs, and I'm sure I'll be okay if it happens, but I only know that I'll be okay because of what I experienced in '09. So I'll walk through those, and I'll try not to make this too much of a 3-hour autobiography. But the the reason I started lifting, because I was a begrudging athlete in high school. My dad thought it would be a good thing for me to have that outlet because I was an introverted kid who just played role-playing games by himself, like made Dungeons and Dragons characters and then had an imagination. I was an only child who just didn't do very well socializing, and it really wasn't until like my junior year that I blossomed as an extrovert, had friends, and I was just, bullied and some of the stereotypical things, but really, like, I never went, and I'm going to get jacked and I'll show those bullies. Like that wasn't really in me. So I lifted begrudgingly as a part of my track career because I tried so my dad said, hey, you need to, play some sports and have a physical outlet. Because I did martial arts as a kid for a long time. Then we moved. And when I moved, that kind of went away. I didn't have the opportunity. And I noticed that I didn't fit in socially. And, you watch the movies about high school and it's like, oh, the cool kids are football players. So my junior year, after a very lonely freshman year, I was like, well, I'll play football. Hated it, Eric. I tell you what, man. And my dumbass thought it'd be a good idea to join the military after that experience. But people see like, the South and especially Texas as like the football community. People don't know that Northern California is very much the same way for some reason.
Yeah.
So to give you an idea of what it was like, I'm playing sophomore year in a relatively large high school, but it's in a suburb of a relatively small town, but only a one high school town, so it's a relatively large community. But that means that all these people were playing high school together in like Pee Wee League, in junior high. So they're expecting me to already know at 15, 14 how to play football, how to play positions. Everyone else knows each other. So I was a complete outsider, and I didn't expect that. I'm like, what? They all had played freshmen. And I didn't have an athletic background. So I just had some raw ability. Like I found that when we did running drills, I was coming in second or third most of the time, but that's it. So they put me like a third string free safety, and I couldn't memorize plays, and nobody liked me. It was just a very awkward experience. And I remember we were put in formation and we're marching to a game because that's what you do. And the team captain's yelling, Casa, because we're playing Casa Robles, and we yell, Chilla, over and over and over again. And part of my brain, even at 14 or 15, is going, how is it that these adult men in their 40s who are coaching us think it's appropriate for 14 and 15-year-olds to be yelling that they're going to go kill another team? And that's the culture I was in. And I was like, sweet, I'll go join the military afterwards. And I was like, what am I doing here? I hated it.
Yeah. So
a few of my friends later that, like I did this in freshman year and sophomore year, I ran track. And I was, an insecure kid just like anybody else. I wanted to be cool. I didn't want to do hard things. So I wanted to run the 100 meters. It's not that hard, and it's cool to be fast. Michael Johnson at the time, gold shoes. He's a badass. Unfortunately, I was not fast. So they were like, all right, well, if you can keep that exact same pace for 200 meters, that would be pretty good. Couldn't keep the exact same pace, but it got better. And then they were like, all right, well, if you can keep nearly that pace for a full lap, the 400 meter, then you'll be good. And I was like, so that's still a sprint, right, coach? He's like, yeah, that's the 400 meters and under is technically sprints. And I'm like, what do you mean technically? He says, don't worry about it. So I found out that I was reasonably good at a 400 meter sprint. And I think my best time in high school was like a 51 something or 52.
So you wanted something easy, and you found the most vomit-inducing distance you could possibly run.
Yes. And unfortunately, I was part of a very, very good 4x4 team. I was the worst one on it. One of the guys became a special forces instructor in the Air Force. Another one got a full ride for any sport he wanted to at Division I. And the other guy was Marcus McCauley, who ended up being a wide receiver for the Vikings. So I was the slow guy on that team, even though I'm running a pretty good time for like sections in California, like 52, 51. So I got these rewards, I got the positive feedback, and I'm good at something. Hated it though. Like I literally hated it. And I would be so nervous all day for a track meet, I wouldn't eat anything. So I'd do 16 hours of fasting and then go try to run the most glycolytic event in track. It often went poorly. Sometimes I fell down. I would either not complete the race or get, a pretty good time. So I begrudgingly lifted when the coaches were looking for track because my whole athletic experience had been mostly negative, to be honest. So then I joined the Air Force and I found I was relatively gifted, but I did the push-ups to the sit-ups, I run 2 miles or whatever. But I never liked, and I didn't think I was someone who liked physical exercise. But there were little hints of it, and I think it was mostly just from, the negative experiences I had. I think there was a hidden athlete inside of me. Because when I went through this relatively traumatic experience while I was in the Air Force, I had someone very close to me have something negative happen to them, and I'm talking around it because it's really more their story than mine. But it affected me a lot because I was quite close to them. And I had no ability or outlet to deal with it because I was in a duty assignment that didn't allow me to take leave during the time when it happened. So I felt like I had no outlet. And I did actually literally experiment with some very negative outlets like self-harm or binge drinking. And I had enough self-awareness to be like, this is not a good idea. And there's got to be some other way to let this out. But not doing anything feels impossible. So I had a buddy of mine, big shout out to Patrick, who introduced me to the encyclopedia of bodybuilding. And he basically mentored me in doing bodybuilding workouts. And he was like, this is going to be empowering. It's going to get you strong. We're going to get you big. We're going to train. And the first workout, and I'm not exaggerating at all, I mean everything that I say literally, we had a leg day because he wanted to show me like, okay, you really about this? Let's go. And we did like leg press, leg extension, leg curl, and finished with 3x10 on deadlifts. It's just 135. And on my third set, on my 10th rep, I threw up my back, went outside, and threw up. That's how I felt. And I looked up and I went, fuck yeah. And that was the moment I knew that something visceral inside of me wanted this. And it did start quite negatively. Like I was overtraining and pushing things too hard. But I just became obsessed. I was bit by the iron bug on a very deep level. And it gave me this outlet that I knew was not negative, at least as negative as it was. It wasn't positive at this point.
Yeah.
And then, then now we're connecting kind of to where I started. I got out of the Air Force, became a personal trainer. It turned into a positive thing, a career move. It gave me some direction in life, and it gave me an outlet. And I found that I loved it, and I had a talent for pushing myself really hard once I felt I had a connection to it, which was what was always lacking in high school. And we were trained to failure, past failure. Big shout out to my first training partner, Adam Ripa, who I met in the military. And yeah, it led to eventually me competing in 2007. So that was my connection. It was a very emotional connection. But then as soon as I found myself making my identity bodybuilding, because I was emotionally connected to it, then I became interested in exploring it. And I tracked down and I watched Pumping Iron, and I became obsessed with Frank Zane's physique, which is hence I did the homage to him in 2019. And I started reading and learning about these guys. And that was a seed. And I thought it was really cool. And I liked those physiques more than the current IPB Pro crop. So there was this multiple seeds that you can see led me to natural bodybuilding.
And I felt completely the opposite. When I did watch bodybuilding stuff, it was like, back then Ronnie Coleman was kind of, his last Olympia was, do you remember? 05. So we were still on the tail end, and like Ronnie was so different that still in 2009, everyone was still like, oh, check out the old videos of Ronnie, right? Like, yeah, man. Ronnie was believable, different. But like Ronnie Coleman, Lee Priest was high on my list. Freaky physique. But yeah, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off, but.
No. Like the thing is, I appreciated those physiques, but I remember I still adamantly feel in 2007 that Dennis Wolf should have won, because I just couldn't deal with the wastes of the pros, and I couldn't relate to it because I'd been exposed to this other pathway, and because I was a competitor, I wanted to relate to the people I was watching. It wasn't a circus show for me. So I had a ton of respect and appreciation. I would follow it. But I think the last Mr. Olympia I watched all the way through might have been 2007. I watched it in 04, 05, 06. And then I watched it in 07. And I was like, nah, this just ain't for me. And I started following the natural bodybuilding scene because that's what I was going to become. And I had a very obsessive relationship with it. I remember literally saying to someone in 06, my off season before I started prepping, like, so how do you have the discipline? And I said, well, every decision in life, I simply think, is this good for bodybuilding or bad for bodybuilding? And if it's bad, I won't do it. It's because I stopped drinking. I would only eat certain things. But I was fortunate it wasn't the Instagram era. It was in the, like, hey, you're a natural 6-foot guy. Okay, so you'll be 220 on stage, And by the way, the peak off-season weight for me shouldn't even be 220 now. But we didn't have a really concept of what's legit or not, and it was heavily influenced by the enhanced scene. So I was eating everything. I was trying to get huge. I'd been a skinny kid all my life. Like, I think when I started lifting, I was $170.
Yeah.
And by the end of '06, I got up to 220. And I had no concept that if I gained weight, it could be body fat.
Yeah.
I remember my first trial cut that I did in '05 or '06, early in the year. I was like, let me do a mock contest prep. I'm like, I'm 220. If I lose 20 pounds, I'll probably be in shape. So let me just lose 10 and see how it looks. So I lost 25, and I realized that at that point, I was probably 25 pounds over stage weight.
Yeah.
So that was a very humbling experience, but I'm glad I did it, or I would have been horribly out of shape in '07. And I actually did pretty decent in '07 as far as conditioning. But yeah, I was super obsessive. There was that comment that I made in the off season, and I remember I was in the car with my wife sometime either in the '07 season or shortly after it. And I said, I don't know if I would keep lifting if I didn't think I could become Mr. National Olympia one day. And I immediately thought, like, that's not good, and that was kind of the seed of eventually getting a deeper connection and thinking more about and exploring myself. And that was a turning point because I remember my very first show, I competed in novice and the open. And I won my weight class in the novice, looking terrible. It just wasn't a very competitive class. And then I placed last in the open 10 minutes later. And I had this whiplash effect. And I was like, oh. And then I decided 1 week later to compete in an NPC show, knowing that I would not place. I placed 16th along with 7 other middleweights. It's actually called did not finish. We're not ranking after 15. There's 23 middleweights in the 2007 Contra Costa. Huge show, national qualifier.
Yeah.
Jay Cutler's guest posing. I meet him. But what I did do is I fixed my color, I fixed my posing, I fixed my peak week, and I dialed in, and I looked way better than I did the week prior. And I realized I felt more rewarded by that. So my philosophy is very slowly starting to shift from I won't even train, what's the point if I'm not the best in the world, to let me see about being my best, and we'll see where the chips fall. But that beast is never left inside of me like that, who still wanted to be the best in the world. And so that was basically where I started, that entry point, that emotional connection where I processed like trauma, more or less, in my life through a sport. And then I became this completely self-identified, attached bodybuilder. And that became the direction of my entire life. And I wanted to pursue a career as a trainer. I wanted to coach bodybuilders. I wanted to be a bodybuilder. Anything in my life was going to be expressed through that. So that's kind of, and powerlifting, to be honest, they were like one and the same, just lifting and competitive lifting.
Yeah, you're kind of talking about that idea of like, I don't want to do this unless I'm going to be the best at it or unless I'm going to win it, right? And that's something that I struggled with a lot during my, as a competitive bodybuilder. I was probably one of those people that you hear this all the time. There's people who want to do a competition and they say, well, I just need to bring up my legs and then I'll be ready. And then they bring up their legs and they're like, when I was bringing up my legs, I feel like my pecs kind of fell behind. So let me bring those up and then I'll be ready. And then what do you know? Their lats aren't quite there yet, right? And they kind of kick the can down the road, and all of a sudden, then life happens. You get hurt. You have a baby. Things get crazy, and you never do it, right? Mm-hmm. And I feel I was really fortunate that I was just interested enough to take that initiative to finally, go for it and actually do a competition. But I have always been with bodybuilding one of those people who I'm like, and with powerlifting too, like I didn't do a bodybuilding show until I was like, oh, I definitely feel like I can go win a novice class. And then I did. And then I didn't compete again until I was like, I think I can go win my open class. And then I did. Mm. And so there was a time where like my first 5 bodybuilding shows, I looked back and I got, in all of them, the first one I got first place in the novice and won the novice overall. And then the next 4 shows, I won first place in my class. And on one hand, that's a good thing, but in another way, that's kind of gets at some of those core things you were talking about, which is like, well, are you just doing this to win it, and are you delaying other opportunities because you're like, well, I'm not going to do it until I'm totally certain that I'll win. Like same thing with powerlifting. I didn't enter a meet until I was going for a state record. That meant a lot to me because it just so happened to be I think the state record at the time was like the squat was 497.5. And I was like, okay, I will do a powerlifting meet because I want my first 500-pound squat to be official and it'll be a state record. That's cool. That's just really fun. Cool. So it happened that way, which was cool. But I have that same kind of thing looking back where it's like, I don't know, especially early on, if I could have found those kind of intrinsic rewarding factors of saying, yeah, my placing at this show wasn't great, but I know I looked better than last week, and that's what it's about. Like, I still think I leaned a little too heavily on those external, like, I need the plastic. Give me the plastic trophy that's shaped like a gladiator for some reason, you know? But I liked how you mentioned that once you got into it, you know, everything at that point was kind of in some way kind of related to it, you know? Not that you are like, you know, you have a one-track mind and it's like your whole life is about bodybuilding necessarily. You know, you have a family and things like that.
Me too.
But, you know, you're a well-balanced person. But when it comes to your professional endeavors, your hobbies, things like that, they are pretty, they all fall under that umbrella.
Absolutely.
And so is bodybuilding what got you into doing research and kind of convinced you should do a PhD?
100%. Yeah. So I went from thinking, because of those kind of like really steep logarithmic newbie gains, like you know, when you're early on in the sport or lifting, you don't really understand that bodybuilding is basically like a dog and pony show at the highest level. It's like, look, if you're not between 5'6" to 5'10" at most, and you have a huge rib cage, tiny waist, broad hips but small joints otherwise, and very broad clavicles and low attachments in your lats, then you're capped, you know, I didn't realize that. So I thought, I went from 170 to 220 and still had my top 4 abs. And, you know, I deadlifted 500 pounds almost in my first 2 years of training and benched over 315 my first 2 pounds. Like, I'm going to be like, I'm ready. Like I can see my trajectory, kind of back to that. And then when I started to taper off, and then when I finally dieted all the way down and I saw pictures and I saw people next to me, I'm like, man, I don't have a V taper. I have like a T taper, and I'm 6 foot and skinny, you know? So like, if you look at my parents, I have on the Matthew side, which is my mom's side, they're awesome, by the way. Ton of good athletes, all a little bit shorter, stocky, large joints, and they all put on muscle really easily. So I got some of that. I got enough of that, I'll say. My dad's side, almost all the men are 6'1" to 6'3", $160, $170. I make them look skinny. Even before I started lifting, like I looked a little more broad-shouldered than them, but they're all like if I was a pure Helms, it would be no chance. I should be a swimmer. And like literally, actually, my dad was the like nearly a state champion swimmer. So it would be, so like I see that I have a mixture of that, and I'm starting to realize in 07, like, frick, and this is where the insecurity came. Because like at first I had this reward and I do well in the novice, I put on all this muscle, and I'm the guy getting these rewards as far as, like, you know what you're talking about, you have a good game, and I was reasonably rational and intelligent. And so everything was coming up aces for me, right? I thought I had a huge, bright future. And then I start to see like, maybe I'm not that good. And all the insecurities I had from it being in high school started creeping in, and like, can I be that good? Maybe I really need to just focus on improving me. So I started to have this seed of doubt and this other voice that I had to combat. Like, you know, maybe this isn't for you. Maybe you can't go as far as you think. You learned some cool things from it, but maybe you should do something else. And I remember just very committing to so at some point during my contest prep or the year before, and I was like, no, everything you've ever started that you weren't good at, you stopped. Like, you're Vince Vaughn from Dodgeball. No matter what, we're going to stick with this. And there was like a turning point in my personality where it's like, we're just going to take bodybuilding as far as we can. I don't know where that's going to be. We're going to take it as far as we can. And we're going to maximize and fill up your cup. So some of that was actually like a coping strategy, you know? So I think that's how I got around that for me. And then another thing I noticed was that I was getting a lot more respect on like the forums and in person from my knowledge around bodybuilding because I was, of course, obsessing over the stuff all the time and applying my mind to it. And I was a good student, but I was like, again, a Vince Vaughn student. Like I would take the AP classes because I knew if I got a B, it would count as an A on my GPA. And I had no intention of like trying to get an A, and I did not like school. I only liked things I was interested in, right? And I think part of it was I was afraid that if I really applied myself and didn't get an A, that it meant I was actually stupid. And I was like, imposter syndrome type of deal. But man, I started becoming like, the local guru, the guy you ask questions of at the gym, and the guy who knows things, and regardless of whether I really did or not. I was a personal trainer far too early. I started personal training in 05. I only started lifting in 04, right? So I was exactly.
I started coaching when I was 18 years old. So yeah.
There you go. See, we're both the person we're trying to educate you against listening to in the future.
A little story about that though.
Let's go.
I was a strength coach working with high school wrestlers and high school football players, and started out just kind of helping them implement their program. And then the next summer came back, got a little bit more autonomy, a little bit more control. The next summer, it was my program, start to finish. And I went in there and I said, Coach, we have 2 objectives for the wrestlers. We're not going to have shoulder injuries this year, and we are going to look absolutely jacked. Now, did I train them in the way that was most advisable for wrestlers? In hindsight, no. I was doing my best, but it was dumb. But at that time, there was a wrestling forum where I would kind of see what was going on. Because like you were saying, like California football, Texas football is big. Ohio high school wrestling is huge. I mean, it is serious stuff. And so there were forums where you could keep tabs on the tournaments as they were going on. So I knew my guys were getting ready for their first big tournament of the year. It's like this big first, kind of blowout weekend where all the big teams come and kind of figure out where they're at this year. And the first comment that somebody put on there, one of the first comments in the entire thread on this massive tournament was, "What is in the water over there? These kids are huge," referring just to my high school. Awesome. And I was like, okay. I was like, I hope they do well, but I'm shutting my laptop. I'm leaving. It can't get better than this. So yeah. But yeah, it was so stupid because I trained an entire wrestling team as if they were bodybuilders, and they were damn good bodybuilders, and they had a good wrestling season as well. But yeah, I think everyone gets into training and coaching, probably not everyone, but a lot of folks get into it a little bit earlier than they should. And I'm growing to find that that's okay. 100%. You get better at it and it's fine.
It means you're passionate and it means you're motivated. And so long as you don't let the Dunning-Kruger effect take hold or your ego take hold, then it's going to be part of the pathway to becoming good, right? So, and I'd like to think that's the case for me, but yeah, there were some dumb things I did early on, like giving out diet plans where you can't combine carbs and fat. You don't want to store that, so just have cheese for this meal, like dumb shit. But anyway, so yeah, I started educating myself quickly, and I started following the evidence-based fitness space at that time. Back on the forums at this time, there was a screen name called Straight Flexed. On the bodybuilding.com forums, and that was Lane Norton. And there was this guy named Dr. Joe who kept showing up in the magazines, the Natural Bodybuilding and Fitness magazine. And in Borders, you'd see, oh man, Jim Cordova on the cover, current Mr. Universe, right next to, I guess it was Phil Heath, or I can't remember who it was. I moved in Jay Cutler around this time, I guess. And I was like, oh man, I want to be on the cover. And I'm reading, and Dr. Joe Klimczewski is advertising for Perfect Peaking. He has a doctorate in multiple doctorates. He is a WBF pro, and he coaches people, and you can contact him and he'll do it via email with you. And I'm like, wow, that's pretty cool. I want to get into coaching bodybuilders. And Lane Norton, I realized he's doing it, and he's talking about it on the forums. And this guy's doing his PhD while he's competing, and he's, coaching these people, and they're getting lean, and he's talking about these new avant-garde ideas like not cutting water, and maybe training for strength sometimes. Like, oh, fat, like I've been doing that for 2 years already. That's so cool. Power hypertrophy adaptive training. And I remember thinking like, well, it's not really power. It's more like strength. Like, okay, So just my young mind is being
probably don't call it chat though. It's probably not as catchy.
Yeah, 100% not. Strength hypertrophy intensive training is actually the way to go.
Yeah.
But I remember thinking like, I'm going to model my career off of Lane Norton and Dr. Joe, because personal training was cool, but I really wanted every one of my clients, like you did your wrestlers, to be bodybuilders and powerlifters. And I was not a good personal trainer for a while until I embraced the fact that maybe I need to meet people where they're at and give them their goals, not my goals. But anyway, so that was somewhere I was getting rewarded. And I was also intensely interested in trying to figure out better ways to improve myself. Because like, oh, well, maybe I don't have the genetics for this, but I know I got the mind for it. And I have the willpower, right? Those are my secret weapons. So I remember like telling Alan Aragon in the nutrient timing forums, just like get to the point. Like, I'm like, listen, so how many grams of carbohydrates should I have post-workout on my arm day? Because I know there's an answer. There's an optimal. And, you know, he's giving a reasonable, like, well, I mean, you're probably not. And eventually he was just like, he just blew me out, like, have 60 grams of carbs. So I'm like, thank you. About time. You know, like I was one of those annoying people who, you know, pester me now. And I can relate to it. But that was where I was at. And then I moved from being this very black and white, pure, just give it to me because I'm an athlete, to let me figure these things out so I can help people, and enjoying the coaching process and getting social reward for it. And then I just kept having my insecurity, at least on the intellectual side, defeated. And I was, you know, then I finished my bachelor's program. Then I got my CSCS and I scored pretty well. And then I got hired as an instructor at a personal training college. And now we're in my third season. And, you know, then I started a master's degree program online while I was working. And I'm able to do that while I'm coaching and starting 3DMJ with the guys, while I'm competing. And I actually succeeded in all of them. And I was like, well, shit, maybe actually I can pursue this all the way. So that was kind of my arc there. And I found that I fell in love with the science just as much as I did the culture, my emotional connection, and the experience of competing. And then a little add-on thing of my motivation to bodybuild started to parallel yours. I was really interested in like, oh, what am I experiencing? And I remember reading the Minnesota Semi-Starvation, I'm going to say study, but it's like, you can find a book on it. There's a Wikipedia page that's as long as most studies.
It's a studies. The results are a 2-volume book. I think it's about 600 pages total.
Yeah, so I got access to that through my university access as a PDF and printed it out, and that took a ton of paper. It was stupid. And I also read the studies that were written about it. Like there's like a 2009 like revisiting They Starved So We Could Not or whatever. So
it's a great paper. I love it. It is a great paper.
It's a fantastic one. You learn about like some of the more qualitative experience of these conscious objectors and how they had to have a buddy system so they wouldn't go off their diet.
I used to tell people, you cannot coach a bodybuilder if you've not competed. And then when I read that paper, I said, well, this paper will get you kind of close to understanding some of the things that you would never think to look out for.
Eric, as a skinny kid who is naturally skinny, the intense binge eating that I went through after 07, I put on 48 pounds in 2 months. I went from a stage weight of 176 or 178 or something like that, and not even shredded, just lean, to 226 pounds 2 months later, and feeling so out of control, not understanding how all that willpower just went out the window, probably had diagnosable binge eating disorder. The one thing that gave me a sense of grace and that maybe I'm not just a weak person inside and that all the imposter syndrome cards crashed down was reading this study and reading about the guy who got caught by the military police because he broke into the commissary and was sitting there eating food in the aisle, or the guy who then decided to become a chef after that experience because he got so obsessed with food, or the guy who cut his own finger off, quote unquote, accidentally to get kicked out of the trial. I'm like, oh my God, okay.
Yeah.
This is actually normal, as abnormal as it is, and I need to find a smarter, better way to do it. That was my entrance into the science.
And relevant to bodybuilders when they said, okay, you can have like sugar-free gum, and then they're like, okay, no more gum.
Yeah, you had 10 packs today.
Yeah.
Or them adding, them finding them in the chow hall when they're eating on the space and they're adding liquid to their meals just to bulk it up. I was like, my God, this is way too relatable.
Yeah.
And it made me realize this is an intense sport, and it's not just been about getting really lean and big, and this is going to really require me to go places, and I was ready, So that was kind of how I started on the academic track. It started as, let me just figure this out as an athlete to be better, and then the social rewards and the career opportunity, and then I really started to enjoy the intellectual pursuit just as much as the physical pursuit of bodybuilding. And then later, as people have seen now, my later career arc, I've appreciated the artistic side of it. Because the one thing that I really did love that's athletic when I grew up, my sophomore, junior, and senior year was breakdancing. So I was a huge hip hop head growing up, and I did have some of that martial arts background. And breakdancing was, I didn't even notice that I was putting forth an intense effort. I would finish for the day, finish track practice sometimes, and we would go, my buddy Justin's house, we would get out the linoleum in his garage, and we'd breakdance until like we were forced to come home for dinner. And the amount of energy output and the amount of time and effort I put into it, it looked like, like a professional athlete in retrospect. But it felt like I was playing video games. That's kind of, and that's what bodybuilding, then bodybuilding became that. And I didn't keep breakdancing, but I still had some of my pop locking skills. So people have probably seen some of my posing routines out there online, but in most of them, not all of them, like this season, I just did kind of a classic routine because that's more of the just feeling I had this year. I started to express myself, and I realized that bodybuilding is just as much a sport as it is art. And I've even written a philosophy paper on that, arguing that it is a sport, but it's definitely art-like. So yeah, but those were later. So I kind of had this emotional connection, and then I had an intellectual connection, and then I had a historical connection. Or I should say the historical connection came last, but so emotional, intellectual, and then artistic, and then more modern times is understanding the sociology and the history of it and connecting with my roots. Because if there's any culture that I actually feel connected to, it's not the fact that I'm, 2% Italian or 30% Irish or 20% Nordic. It's literally like bodybuilding is my people,
Yeah.
So
I will say, like, as much as I say, like, oh no, I'm just into the physiology, like, as we've had this meandering conversation about the good old days and taking it back to the start, it has given me some of those warm, fuzzy, nostalgic feelings of like, lifting was different back in the day. It really, and it's, and I don't want to sound like, an old boomer saying, oh, it just isn't the same anymore. But there is something about that period where the social media sites hadn't really become what they are today. Most of the bodybuilding chatter happened on bodybuilding focused forums, not like your personal Instagram or Facebook or Twitter kind of page or feed. And yeah, it was people who would come together and just kind of share what they were doing, what their inferences were. And you would create those kind of social hierarchies of who really knows their stuff. And
Yes.
People start kind of getting that clout. And then the local gym scene, I think, felt a little bit different back then as well.
100%.
People were a lot more present in what they were doing. And I feel like there was more of a community vibe within the gym. And yeah, I mean, I don't, and that's not specifically bodybuilding, but it is a lifting focused fitness culture that yeah, I guess in hindsight does have quite a bit of nostalgia that comes with it.
And actually, I'm glad you said the word community, because that's actually, so I mentioned that I eventually got the historical interest in it, that absolutely had a scientific interest, but it all started with an emotional and identity-based interest, and then a scientific one. But actually, what really, really drew me in was equal parts to the others, if not maybe greater and only equal on that emotional one, was the community side of it.
Yeah.
So, I mean, if you want to talk self-determination theory, we've fulfilled every little box.
Yeah.
Because anyone who does a natural bodybuilding show, especially a local amateur one, it's very mom and pop, and it's not a bad thing. It's like, I did the 2007 INBA Silver and Black. There couldn't have been more than 40 of us in a high school auditorium hanging out, right? And then the next week I went to Chabot College, a large community college in California, and like I said, I was up there with 23 other middleweights, and Jay Cutler was guest posing. And there were legitimate fans in the audience, not just my mom, my dad, my stepmom, my wife, and every other competitor's equivalent, right?
Yeah.
And at 2007, I met a young man named Father Flex, who I'd known on the forums, Alberto Nunez. So we did our first show together. He placed third in the open class when I was last and fourth. And we got to meet each other for the first time, and I had this community on the contest prep forums. And then when I actually did a show, and I felt that everyone was in it together, and there was a lot of sense of community. It wasn't highly competitive. It was different. Everyone was kind of like, "This is awesome. I'm so glad we can share this." The natural bodybuilding scene is a really, really cool community, And even now that I've done some really big shows, like 100 plus competitors, it has still maintained that. And that is something I love about it. And as much as it was cool to do the Contra Costa, and I do respect that, it was a lot different. Like I was hanging out, just some older competitor took me under his wing because he could tell this is my second show. I was young, and he was, a bigger dude, as a lot of them are. I'm not assuming he's enhanced yet, because not all of them are at the regional scene. They may plan to go that route, but he was expecting a top 10 placing, and he wasn't talking about that. It was all cool. And then as soon as he did not make the top 10, he says, I didn't train like 11th or whatever. And he just storms off and he never spoke to me again. And this was in multiple hundreds number of competitor shows. And after that, I didn't really have anybody to hang out with or talk to. Like that, okay. And everyone was looking at each other like we're here to beat each other in a zero-sum game. A lot more people who were in a lot worse physical states. And it was just a very different scene. And I don't know that I would have had that connection if I'd stayed in the NPC route. I think maybe eventually. Because I did see some of like the higher level national competitors who doing the show multiple times. They knew each other and they were clicked up.
Yeah.
But yeah, I there is something special to say about the natural bodybuilding community.
Yeah.
And it really it's something I'm very deeply connected to still today. And it feels like I'm home anytime I'm at a show and I could smell that dream tan in the air for sure.
Yeah, I was thinking about why it took all that reflection to be like, oh no, that was a cool kind of culture to be a part of and stuff. And I think perhaps I, especially at the time, maybe took it for granted because I came into natural bodybuilding culture from wrestling culture, which has so much overlap. Like, because wrestling in America is not it's not a popular sport. It's a fringe kind of sport. It's a subculture, and it's people who are freaks who want to push their body as far as they can. Like, it is one of those nitty gritty kind of sports where it's like, you know what? My ears are going to get all jacked up. My face is going to look like I've broken my nose 30 times. I'm going to break every finger on my hand. I'm going to get skin diseases. And we love this. And we're going to starve for it and do dangerous water manipulation. Yeah. And so you're like a 16-year-old kid and you're sitting in the sauna being like, yeah, I've been dehydrated for 3 days. Like pushing yourself in ways that are not advisable, but they still do kind of create that sense of community that I think you find in natural bodybuilding, where it's like, listen, we do crazy stuff. We put our bodies through a lot, which puts our minds through a lot. And most people don't get it, but we get each other. And so I think you get a lot of that camaraderie among competitors, where it's like, as long as you're not like the one or two guys in the state that I literally can't stand, like if you pick a random wrestler out of the hat and I'm a wrestler, I probably like you. You know what I mean? And I think with bodybuilder, natural bodybuilding, it's kind of the same thing.
For sure. Yeah, man. And I'm really glad that we've been talking about this, because I think we understand that maybe we're not quite the tale of two different bodybuilders as much as we think. It's just different entry points, right?
Yeah, I might need to think of a different title for the episode. I thought we were so different, and we're uncovering all this common ground.
Well, I think we keep the title because they'll learn, they'll have the same journey with us that we're having with each other. But I'm actually really glad I got all these different connections, and I didn't just stay as like the one track mind competitor, because like that was kind of Jeff Albert's journey initially, and then he had a reintroduction to the sport with the mindset of let's do this for the journey and the enjoyment, which literally started 3D Muscle Journey in 2009, that season when I met him and I met Brad and Berto, and I had a few years under the belt. His philosophy that had him return to the sport, but he was gunning for that pro card from the late 90s all the way to 2004, 2005, 2006, and he had some bitter defeats where he couldn't see a positive that even came out of it. He traveled all the way out there. It was politics. I lost by 1 point. I should be the pro card. Man, screw this sport.
Yeah.
And I think that could have been me if I didn't have these other connections, really, because this was my 5th season, Eric. And like I said, I've been going for this. I've had the goal of turning pro in the WBF and being on that magazine like Jim Cordova for 17 years since I went to that first natural bodybuilding show.
When did you know that was what you wanted to do? Like what made you say pro card in the WNBF is the goal?
Going to that show, that first show, 100%. And then I also wanted to be like Natural Olympia because I did the INBA season, and they talk a really good game. Like, we're water tested with only a legit one, and you can do the USA, then the Natural Olympia, and it was really appealing. But yeah, I was just a little disillusioned with the production quality, and then that email response I got. So I did some shows with the INBA. I competed with them in 2011, and I did actually get my PNBA pro qualification. I won the Nevada State. It was a very small show. And, the reason why I say that is because with that insecurity that grew when I realized I didn't really have the chops to be a competitor, the thing that kept me involved was all those other aspects, the connections that gave me. And I just said, just put your head down, study the shit out of this, and we're going to make the most out of this hand you're dealt. But I always had this underdog chip on my shoulder, and I wasn't sure I'd ever do it. And I was just finding a way to continue to see how far I could take it, because I would have otherwise quit, like I had felt like I'd done other things in my life. So there was this intense hard work and consistent effort that I put in, but it was always in the face of doubt. It's always in the face of insecurity that I could never fully quench or quell. And I remember the first time I won a show, it was the Nevada State, and I immediately diminished it in my own mind. Like, well, yeah, it's not a big organization. It was a small show. But yeah, I'm that guy who if I catch you slipping, maybe I can sneak in and win a show. I may not be the best, but I'm doing good. So like that emotional mindset, like I wasn't the guy who was going like, no, I'm one of the freaks to beat. That has never been a mindset. So I had this kind of pie in the sky goal that maybe I can get my WNBF pro card, but I knew how much harder that was, and I knew how much more competitive it was. And Eric, I tell you what, man, I think if I hadn't had the steeper connection, I would have quit a long time ago, because the number of times that I have been this close to a WNBF pro card it's numerous. In 2009, that is when I really think I solidified my connection to the sport. I didn't have many other coping strategies besides bodybuilding, and that was the year my father took his own life. And I didn't know how to deal with it. I mean, therapy eventually helped. That's what I probably should have done from the start, and I recommend it. But that was a very tough year. I tore my hamstring. The financial collapse meant that the studio I was working at changed owners 3 times. I was training clients and not being paid until that got resolved. I got gypped by national home trainers. They just stopped paying me and disappeared off the internet. I couldn't find them. So financially challenging. I tore my hamstring, like I said, and then just kept competing. My father took his own life, and the next day I did a powerlifting meet. So I just didn't have any ability to cope, but I poured everything into, well, let me put my emotions through the vehicle of bodybuilding, and that is going to give me some outlet, because this is too big to feel. So I have to feel through my sport. And I dieted from January all the way through to the end of September, and I did 5 shows. And I did the Cap City, which eventually became the Muscle Mayhem INBF show. And then I drove up into Washington, first time I did it. And in both of those, I was in the overall with Jeff. He lost by 1 point and then got his pro card the next one. And it was really good for me to see at this critical time point, because he got his pro card after retiring and coming back 3 years later with the mindset of doing it for the journey and the process. And I saw that, okay, that's a really good reaffirmation. The guy's 38, and now he's getting his pro card after trying in his 20s and hating it. And now he's loving it, and it's a cherry on top. It's not everything. So that helped me stomach those 2 things, where I got into the overall, but then lost and didn't get a pro card. And then I kept pushing. And I did the Leroy Perry show, who's a relatively well-known mid-2000s WNBF pro who had the Sacramento Cup. It was a pro-am. And I did that in 2009, and I placed second to the guy who got the pro card. So I was in 2 overalls and placed second to the overall winner that year. And so I was just like, I was just still in the mindset of I'm so close. And then I got my pro card, but in a different organization the next year, or in 2011. And then I put my competition on hold, because this is the year before I moved to New Zealand and started my doctoral studies and my second master's. And I came back, finished my PhD in 2017, and I was like, all right, now we're going to get back to bodybuilding. I'm going to take an off season in 2018. Then in 2019, I took a run at it, and I placed second in the INBF Polynesian show in April. And then I went out and I won the INBF River City, but there wasn't enough competitors to turn pro. And then 2 weeks later, I did the IBF Muscle Mayhem, coming back to the Cap City. I placed second in the middleweights. And so every single time before the season that I've done an INBF show, I've either placed second or I've gotten into the overall every single time. So I've gotten so close so many times. And even this season, that was the same experience. I did the WNBF New Zealand show and I won. And this is the biggest, most competitive show I've done that I've won, but it was still relatively small. And there was a panel that decided whether it was a high enough quality to turn pro. And they said, you're not quite there yet, Eric. If you were a little leaner or if there's more competitors, we would have awarded the pro card to you, but not this time. And that same voice of insecurity came back. It's like, yeah, well, I could sneak in and win these shows, but I'm not quite there. And then the next weekend, I placed second to Lorenzo Elder, one of our clients, stacked middleweight class. He went on to win the pro card. So that's more times than I can count without actually thinking about it, of how I've been this close. And it just kind of kept that insecure voice alive. So the experience of going over to do the WNBF Australia show, nearly 100 competitors, stacked classes, and to go in there and clearly win my weight class. Or actually, that's not true. They're like the second place, like Arash, dude, you looked great. Like, had a bit of a battle there. But I went up against a guy. So the guy who took second in my weight class is actually a ANBA as well as I think a PNBA pro. And he's done very well in the pros. And to beat him, I was like, oh shit. And I beat him in the Masters as well. And I beat him in that. And I think it was very tight. He did get moved to the center. So I had a battle with a legitimate pro and I came out on top. And then the opposite decision of what happened in New Zealand, they said, hey, look, we've got more than 8 competitors. We have the ability to award a second pro card. You didn't win the overall against Muhammad, and honestly, that was the right call. But we want to see if you or the guy who placed second to him in the other weight class is the second best person in the show. And that was Lawrence Greaves. Very, very good natural bodybuilder in Australia, and he's been just on the cusp of getting his pro card. And he's only 23. So then we got an overall comparison. And I got to go up against basically 3 of the best like amateur bodybuilders in Australia. One of them, he actually has a pro card in 2 pro cards in other organizations. And then I came out on top to get the second, not on top. Shout out to Muhammad, he won the overall. But I went to a big show and I was one of the guys to beat. And I got my pro card. And it was, that insecure voice inside of me was just like, does not compute. And I felt amazing. I felt like the voice went away. And then 2 days later, I woke up and I was just thinking, is this a gift? Did they give this to me because I'm Eric Helms? Or is this bullshit? Like, oh, the panel decided, like, was everyone sitting there thinking, okay, this guy won't stop competing. Let's just give him his pro card. So hopefully he shuts up and goes away. And like my wife had to talk me off the ledge. Alex Thomas, who I stayed with, had to like talk me off the ledge. Like, dude, look at the pictures. Like, that's your body. And I remember as I was pumping up and the peak went fantastic, I was in as lean a condition as I've ever been, but I'd made these substantial improvements in my physique. Part of me could not like accept that that's what I looked like. I was like, man, I don't know what this is. I don't know who that guy is. He's pretty good, but that's not me. So I keep, in 2019 and this year, I look at pictures of myself and I'm like, that's not me. Like, I don't know what's going on. Maybe I just peaked well, or the lighting's good, or the photographer, or whatever. But there's been a part of me that has not been able to accept that I've made it as far as I have. And, turned 40 and just to see that my best bodybuilding years might be ahead of me has been just a rekindling of that kind of same nostalgic feeling that I had in 07 of, I don't know what's possible, but because I didn't think this was.
Yeah.
So
that's a good transition. I mean, we've talked about where it started. We've talked about your recent success, and now you've got one more show this season. Is that right? One more show?
Yeah, man. Yeah.
And so I guess you're going to some little no-name show with a bunch of losers, and you'll probably just go collect your trophy?
That's right. Yeah. So apologize for getting emotional, but it does mean a lot to me. But I can't believe it, dude. I'm doing my pro debut in the pro division at Worlds, which is the biggest, most competitive show in the world that I am qualified for. And it honestly doesn't even matter what happens. Like, I'm expecting to get pictures while I get dunked on by Jordan. And that'll be awesome because there's a huge part of me that thought I would never make it this far. Like, this was outside of my reach. So to even be there at all is a huge... Yeah, I haven't figured it out yet. But I'm when this episode comes out, I'll be just inside of 2 weeks out from... Actually, no, I will be exactly 2 weeks out because we're a day ahead here in New Zealand. So if you're listening to this, I'm 2 weeks out from Worlds in the pro division. And yeah, it's going to be a huge honor. That's right.
And I know that you said that you are qualified for this show in the technical sense, but hopefully that insecure voice interprets that in a different way. Like, you are qualified for this. Like,
yes.
not technically, not
a qualification.
Yeah. I mean, you are qualified. You have made it. It's been a super long journey with ups and downs, but by embracing the journey aspect of it, like you said, I mean, now you're here. And I mean, making your pro debut at Worlds in the WNBF, it's going to be absolutely incredible. I mean, what a cool experience. And being out on the West Coast, I mean, are you going to be able to see any of the 3DMJ guys when you're traveling?
All of them. That's going to be amazing. So Brian, the newest addition to the team as a coach, is going to be there. Brandon's going to be there getting, who edits this podcast. Big shout out to him. He has always been so awesome. We had a great experience connecting. Brought him out to the Polynesian show, so we hung out in Honolulu, and he documented my competitive experience there with Berto, and he's going to be doing that for myself. Jeff is competing in the pros at 52, and he's having his own awesome journey. He wasn't sure if he could be his best at 52, and I think he will literally be the best Jeff we've ever seen in the pros, and I think there's a very strong possibility he's going to have some metal around his neck when it's all said and done, the dust clears. This has meant a ton to Berto as well. He's basically been my coach from 2009 onward. So it's been a huge collaborative experience. So Brad, Jeff, Berto, and Brian, and Brandon are all going to be there. We've got athletes. I'll be coaching on Saturday, just helping out. I don't have any personal athletes, but we've got multiple. And we'll be up there with our fellow athletes in the pros. So I might be in the same weight class as Evan Godby. He's another very good Australian WNBF pro. Depending upon how they break the weight classes out, I could see Jeff maybe sneaking into the lightweights because he's leaner than he's ever been. And I don't know if you're aware of this guy, Dirk Emmerich, but he's an incredible natural bodybuilder who's one of Berto's clients. He's out there placing top 3 in pro shows right now in his pro debut. I think if there's a bantam class or a lightweight class, he's a favorite. So we're going to be up there with our own, our fellow clients. It's going to be a really cool experience. So I can't wait, man.
That's awesome. And it is, I have no idea. I think it is important to make this all about me, so I will. I have no idea what the future holds for me as a lifter. Some folks might be aware I've been dealing with the most frustrating injury, and it's. I think I first noticed it probably around 2017, maybe, and I've been working through it. And for a while, I worked through it the old-fashioned way, which was maybe if I ignore it and keep training the way I always train, it'll just go away.
Like literally work through it. Yeah.
Didn't turn out that way. And to be fair, almost every injury I've ever had, that's been pretty effective. So unfortunately, I've had this this nerve injury that it's my ilioinguinal nerve, which kind of goes right around the hip and the lower abdomen. Nice. And so, I mean, anything that generates a lot of intra-abdominal pressure, anything that involves a lot of hip flexion, really causes a tremendous amount of pain and discomfort. And it's not even the type of thing where you can just kind of, grunt and just push through it, because the pain really intensifies. Like, I'll wake up at night with a tremendous amount of pain from stuff I did earlier in the day. So yeah, it has been, I will say, it's like, we talked in this podcast a lot about identity. And when you start lifting at 12 like a madman, by the time you're 14, you're more jacked than everybody. And that's when you start high school. And, when I was in high school, I was the jacked kid that was obsessed with fitness. Everybody kind of put me, that was how they viewed me. And I certainly, when you're in high school and there's an identity that's assigned to you and it actually lines up with your values and you think it's cool, you lean into that, right? And so, yes. From the age of 12 to the age of when I last competed in 2017-ish, I mean, that entire period of time, fitness was really an identity for me. And I had set a lot of goals and largely gone out and taken care of them one way or the other, you know? And so, yeah, it's been an interesting couple years where, you know, up until 2017, I started noticing it. 2018, 19, it was getting worse. By 2020, it was pretty unbearable. And it's actually been a pretty long stretch of time here where I'm kind of short on answers in terms of what to do about it. I mean, I've been working with Jason Yor. He's been helping me out with some exercises because you don't really leap into nerve related surgeries. That's kind of a huge deal. Nerves are important. So surgical options are not ideal, and the success rates are low anyway. So
Yeah.
it's just been one of those things where I try some physical therapy, and then I can't train the way I like to train. So you kind of lose interest and say, well, I'll focus on other things and get back into it. So anyway, long-winded rant, but it's all to say, hearing about, folks who like Jeff are like at their best at 52. I think you said he turned pro at 38, right?
Yep.
I mean, it's one of those things where if I'm not careful, I convince myself that I'm an old man at 32, and I'm like, well, I guess my bodybuilding days are behind me, but I have no idea. It's really cool to hear about. I think I think this is a callback to earlier when I said young people, we always think in linear relationships, right? It's all we're capable of. I don't know if I said that on air or off air.
No, you did. You said it.
Okay. Yeah. But, cause we were chatting a little bit before we recorded, but, yeah, you always kind of assume, right, from the outside looking in, that if someone is an excellent pro at 52, then they kind of took this kind of linear thing where, and even if it's not linear, it's just every year is additive, and we get in that mindset where, if we have an injury and we have to take 6 weeks off of the gym, we think that we just erased 8 continuous years of gains, right? Because we're like, well, now I'm back to square one, and it's going to, and of course, that's not how it works, right? I mean, there's ups and downs in the journey. You take pauses, you take 10 steps backward, and then maybe you take 20 steps forward in the future. And to call it a journey really is the most appropriate term you can really put on it. So, it's awesome to hear about these different stories of people who experience setbacks. They take time off. They think they're done, and then they come back and say, actually, my best days are in front of me, So, actually, I had no idea when I woke up today that we were going to talk about this. And I woke up today and did my first really good rehab session in a while, where I was like, something came over me last night and I said, I'm going to start rehabbing really hard because I so badly want to get back to training the way I like to train, And so, hey, who knows? Maybe in several years, I'll be up on a stage as well. Maybe you and I will meet on a world stage and go at it. But for now, let's make it all about you again. And on behalf of everyone who can hear my voice right now, wishing you the absolute best of luck with these next 2 weeks of your prep. Do you have anything special planned for getting ready for this last show?
Yeah. So I actually improved from show to show to show, basically kind of doing an abbreviated mid-load, backload. This last one, we noticed I looked a little tighter the Sunday after the show prior, so we shifted it. So I loaded heavy on Wednesday and then moderate on Thursday, Friday, and then I basically barely eat on game day. And I just noticed I can maintain that look. And then, sure enough, 3 or 4 days later, once I get back on the diet, I haven't been doing celebratory meals in any kind of real sense, just like a healthy, nice meal out. And because I basically eat nothing except a little bit of carbohydrates and keep my fluids up on the day of the show, I end up actually in a deficit on every time I compete on Saturdays, which is a little different. And then Sunday, I'm back on the diet. Monday, I'm back on the diet. Tuesday. And then, this Tuesday after the show, I shared with you the video. I hit a new conditioning standard. So I was leaner than I was on Saturday and leaner than I've ever been. So I'm coming into Worlds now with the off-season improvements, which made it possible for me to get this pro card, the posing improvements, which are also led into it, and now being leaner than I've ever been, and thinking, well, you know what? I'm going to give it my damnedest at Worlds. So one thing that was really a big part of my success in 2019 was that once I got in really good shape, we started tapering calories up and eating up into my shows. I just kept looking better and better and better and better, regaining fullness and actually somehow stimulating what appeared to be more fat loss, although it could just been, regaining fullness and looking more lean because fat's staying neutral and the muscle's pushing it out more. So that's the game plan. Doing a relatively aggressive refeed this weekend, and then giving it a few more days to kind of see if we can get a bit more, and then starting like a week and a half out, it's just going to be a linear increase into the show, and then not really going to do a proper peak this time. We just kind of top off the gas tank, and then we think that'll be the best time use of what I have left. Like even if I was to get a little bit tighter, it wouldn't be worth not getting that effect that we saw in 2019.
Yeah.
So that's the game plan, and it'll be good. I will have basically done the reverse diet before I'm even done. And then we'll have a relatively conservative, recovery period. And then I'm going to sit down with every resource available to me, and we're going to figure out how I can do the impossible again. Try to be not just qualified as a pro, but maybe even competitive one day. So now that I believe, I think that's going to be a really exciting journey. So that's the game plan, man.
Awesome. Well, like I said previously, once again, congratulations on earning WNBF Pro status. Good luck with the last couple weeks of your prep as you get ready for WNBF Worlds. I hope that people will listen to this episode the way it was intended. And that is, we might need to do like some imaging. This is two old men on a porch, drinking iced tea in rocking chairs, reminiscing about the good old days. But in your case, there's good days ahead of you. For me, we'll see.
Eric, I truly believe there are, sir. I can say, man, as someone a little bit older than you and who is actually had a 4-year period where I was trying to put off surgery and eventually got it. Not that I'm saying that's the answer for you, and feeling like, oh my God, I got my hips back again. I can actually squat to depth and not be in pain for 2 days. Like some of those seemingly insurmountable things are solutions. So I just want you to stay hopeful, man.
Well, I'm a very extreme. I take an extreme view when it comes to natural bodybuilding. I don't think you should be able to compete if you've had a surgery. So I'm trying to do it the natural way. No medicine that popped up after like the 1500s, because that's not really natural.
I also take Propecia. So my hairline. So basically, the problem is I got elective surgery for my hips, and I also got, my hairline would be more receding than it is. So I'm basically natural from the eyebrows down to the top of my hips. So maybe I should be in men's physique with a hat on. I'm guessing that's probably the only way I could really do natural bodybuilding.
From my view, correct. Yeah.
That's fair. Yeah.
But hopefully people have enjoyed this little nostalgic walk down memory lane, and I'm sure everyone will be on the edge of their seat waiting to hear how things go in the next couple weeks.
Well, thank you, brother. I really appreciate you giving me the time to share this. It's probably the most candid I've been about my journey, and it actually feels good. So I thought I'd be more nervous talking about it, but thank you for the space and the time and the connection.
Yeah, it was a great chat, and hey, we'll be back next week with another episode.